The first time I noticed the portrait, it was simply another piece of decor in our cozy little home. Alice, my wife, had a keen eye for antiques, and she prided herself on finding treasures in the most obscure places. Our house was a testament to her talent. Each room was a curated collection of the past, a nostalgic tapestry where every item had a story, a memory. The portrait was no different, or so I thought. It hung in our bedroom, above the dresser that Alice had painstakingly restored last summer. The painting depicted a woman in a Victorian dress, her expression serene and enigmatic. It was one of Alice's favorite finds, picked up from an estate sale in a neighboring town. She told me she felt an instant connection to it, an inexplicable pull that made her certain the painting belonged in our home. I liked the painting well enough, though it didn't strike me as particularly extraordinary. Just a well-executed piece of art, another silent witness to our daily life. In the evenings, after the day's hustle had settled, Alice and I would sit by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows throughout the room. The painting seemed to absorb the light, the woman's eyes appearing to follow us, though I dismissed such thoughts as mere tricks of the mind. It all started on a chilly October evening, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and whispers secrets to the night. I was reading in bed, Alice already asleep beside me, her breathing soft and rhythmic. The house was quiet, save for the occasional groan as it settled into the shifting temperatures. My attention was pulled from my book by a faint sound, a soft rustling, as though someone were carefully turning pages of an ancient tome. I paused, listening intently, but heard nothing more. Shaking my head, I returned to my reading, convincing myself it was nothing more than the creaks of an old house. The following day passed without incident, the phantom noise forgotten in the light of a busy day. Yet, as night fell once more, I heard it again. This time the sound was clearer, more distinct, emanating from the direction of the portrait. I glanced at Alice, her expression calm and undisturbed in sleep. Deciding not to wake her, I slipped out of bed and approached the painting, my curiosity overcoming any sense of unease. The woman in the portrait stared back at me with her unfathomable gaze. I peered closely, searching for any explanation, a mouse perhaps, or some loose board, but there was nothing, just the painting and its silent occupant. I touched the frame, running my fingers over the intricate carvings. The wood felt cool and smooth, ordinary. As I stepped back towards bed, the rustling stopped abruptly, leaving the room in a silence so profound it seemed to press against my ears. The disturbances became more frequent, each night the same soft rustling, growing louder, more insistent. I began to feel a chill in the room, an otherworldly presence that seemed to watch us, breathe with us. Alice noticed my restlessness, questioned my sleepless nights, but I hesitated to share my growing unease. How could I articulate a fear that seemed rooted in irrationality? A change in Alice also began to manifest. She grew more withdrawn, spending long hours gazing at the portrait, her expression contemplative yet distant, as if listening to a voice only she could hear. Her eyes, once vibrant with life and laughter, now held a shadow, a depth I couldn't reach. I asked her what troubled her, but she would only smile, a mysterious, secretive smile that left me chilled. One particularly cold night, the rustling evolved into a distinct whisper, a susurration that seemed to come from the air itself, wrapping around the room, curling into my ears. Straining to hear, I could make out disjointed words, a language I didn't understand, yet it filled me with an inexplicable dread. Desperation fueled my resolve. I shook Alice awake, needing her to hear the whispers, to validate my experiences. But as soon as she stirred awake, the room fell silent, the voices retreating back into their hidden world. Alice, sleepy and annoyed, dismissed my fears, attributing them to stress and fatigue. She assured me the painting was just that, a painting, but her dismissiveness did little to quell the growing sense of wrongness, a feeling that there was more hidden beneath the paint than met the eye. I couldn't shake the impression that the portrait held a secret, a dark history that reached out to us, whispering its tale to deaf ears. My nights turned into a haunted vigil, waiting for what I knew would come, the whispers and rustle that had become an unwelcome companion. And then it happened. The night that changed everything. I woke to find Alice standing before the painting, her face inches from the canvas, her posture rigid and unnatural. Her eyes were closed, yet she seemed engaged in a silent conversation, her lips moving soundlessly. Fear gripped me, my heart pounding as I called her name, my voice trembling in the stillness. She didn't respond, didn't acknowledge my presence. I approached cautiously, my hand reaching out to touch her shoulder, to pull her back from whatever abyss held her. The moment my hand made contact, she jerked back violently, her eyes snapping open, wild and unseeing. It was as if she were a stranger, a sentinel guarding a secret she wouldn't share. Her eyes eventually met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of recognition of the woman I loved. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by an inscrutable mask. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe and something darker, something that terrified me. I led her back to bed, her movements docile yet distant, like a sleepwalker guided through a dream. The rest of the night passed in an uneasy silence, the house filled with an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to throb with hidden life. I lay awake, every creak and sigh of the house amplified, shaping themselves into patterns my mind couldn't comprehend. Desperation drove me to action. The next morning, I decided to search for the origins of the portrait, to uncover its history and perhaps explain the strange occurrences. I visited the estate sale where Alice had acquired it, hoping to find answers. The seller, a kindly old woman, recalled the painting with surprising clarity. She spoke of its previous owner, a reclusive artist who lived alone, rumored to have dabbled in the occult. Upon his death, the house had been left untouched, its contents sold off to settle debts. The old woman's words did little to comfort me. Rather, they confirmed my deepest fears. I returned home, armed with this new knowledge, determined to confront the darkness that had invaded our lives. As I entered our bedroom, the air felt charged, alive with an energy that seemed to pulse from the portrait itself. Alice sat before it, her gaze transfixed, her expression one of peace and complete surrender. I knew then what needed to be done. I approached the painting, my resolve firm. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices pleading, warning, beseeching. With a strength I didn't know I possessed, I tore the painting from the wall, the frame splintering in my grasp. Behind it, to my horror, was a hidden compartment, a small alcove carved into the wall. Inside lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age, the script elegant and flowing. It belonged to the artist, a man consumed by his own creations, his writings a descent into madness. He spoke of the woman in the painting as his muse, his obsession, his devotion turned darker, a ritual to bind her spirit within the painting, to keep her beauty eternal. As I read, the whispers crescendoed, a storm of voices that threatened to drown me. Alice watched me with a strange detachment, her allegiance seemingly torn between the present and whatever world the portrait had shown her. I knew I had to act swiftly. Gathering the painting and the journal, I carried them outside, the night air biting against my skin. I built a pyre, my hands trembling as I set the portrait atop it. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, a final attempt to dissuade me, to lure me into their dark embrace. But I was resolute. With a flick of the match, the flames leaped hungrily, consuming the painting and its secrets. As the fire burned, I felt a weight lift, the oppressive presence dissipating into the night sky. Alice stood beside me, her eyes clearing, the shadow lifting from her soul. Her hand found mine, a silent acknowledgement of our shared ordeal, our victory over the darkness that had sought to divide us. The whispers ceased, the night settling into a tranquil silence, the specter of the portrait finally laid to rest. Yet, even as the ashes cooled, a lingering unease remained. The experience had left its mark, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. Our home, once a haven, now held a different resonance, an echo of what had transpired. In the weeks that followed, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. Alice and I spoke little of the portrait, an unspoken agreement to leave the past undisturbed. But sometimes, in the deep of night, I would wake, my mind conjuring the faintest whisper, a rustle at the edge of perception. I would listen intently, my heart racing until I convinced myself it was nothing more than the wind through the trees. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the portrait's secret, now revealed, had left a scar on our reality, a reminder of the hidden depths that lie beneath the surface of ordinary life. And as I lay in the quiet dark, I would hold Alice close, my mind turning over the phrase that had become a mantra, a reassurance against the unseen. We are more than the shadows that seek to claim us. We are the light that stands between. In the quiet suburbs of a town that had once brimmed with life and laughter, my husband Jonathan and I found our sanctuary in a charming two-story house, its white walls and blue shutters a promise of tranquility. The house was surrounded by a garden that seemed perpetually in bloom, no matter the season. It was our dream home, a place where we could grow old together, surrounded by the warmth of our memories and the comfort of routine. The first few months after we moved in were idyllic, filled with the mundane joys of decorating and settling in. We spent our weekends painting walls, rearranging furniture, and planting flowers in the garden. Our house began to feel like a true home, each room imbued with our love and laughter. It was during this time that we stumbled upon the painting. It hung in the attic, a place we rarely ventured, content to leave the dust and cobwebs undisturbed. The painting was large, easily 4 feet across, and was covered by a tattered sheet. I remember the day Jonathan suggested we explore the attic, his curiosity piqued by the thought of forgotten treasures. As we climbed the creaky stairs, an inexplicable sense of anticipation filled the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. When we pulled back the sheet, we found ourselves staring at a portrait. It was a masterful depiction of a woman, her age indeterminate, suspended somewhere between youthful and aged wisdom. Her eyes were a piercing blue, so vividly painted they seemed to follow us wherever we moved. Her expression was serene, yet there was an unsettling quality to her gaze, as if she was privy to secrets beyond our comprehension. We debated what to do with the painting. Jonathan, ever the pragmatist, suggested we sell it, claiming it didn't suit the aesthetic of our modern home. But I was captivated by the portrait's enigmatic allure. There was something about the woman that drew me in, her eyes almost pleading with me to keep her. In the end, we decided to hang it in the living room, where its beauty could be appreciated, and so it became a silent witness to our everyday lives. For a while, the portrait was nothing more than an intriguing piece of art. Visitors often remarked on its craftsmanship, and we would share the story of how we discovered it in the attic. Yet, as time passed, peculiar things began to happen. It started subtly, with small objects going missing only to reappear in strange places. A book I was certain I had left on the coffee table would turn up in the kitchen, or a pair of Jonathan's shoes would vanish from the closet, later found at the foot of the stairs. We laughed it off, attributing these incidents to our own absent-mindedness. But slowly, the occurrences grew more unsettling. Lights flickered inexplicably, and shadows seemed to linger in the corners of our vision, always where the portrait hung. At night, as I lay in bed, I would hear whispers echoing through the house, a soft murmur of voices too faint to comprehend. Jonathan dismissed it as the house settling, yet unease gnawed at me, refusing to be ignored. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to emanate from the portrait itself. The woman's eyes, usually so placid, appeared to shimmer in the dim light, alive with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. I found myself leaning forward, straining to understand the words that danced just beyond my grasp. Help me. The words were faint, a breath in the darkness, but unmistakable. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, knocking over a lamp in my haste. The noise brought Jonathan running, and I tried to explain what I had experienced. He listened patiently, though skepticism was etched on his features. He suggested that perhaps I was stressed, that the move and the adjustments to our new life were taking a toll on my mind. I wanted to believe him, to dismiss the incident as a trick of my imagination. Yet, deep down, I knew there was something more, something the woman in the portrait was trying to communicate. As the days passed, the disturbances escalated. The whispers grew more frequent, the words clearer. I began to have vivid dreams, dreams of a time long past. of a life not my own, yet hauntingly familiar. In these dreams, I was the woman in the portrait, trapped in a world of shadows and silence. The air was thick with sorrow, and I could feel her desperation, her longing for release. Each time I awoke, the room would be cold, my breath visible in the air, though the heater hummed steadily. Jonathan watched me with growing concern, his reassurances now tinged with doubt. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of our house, hoping to find some connection to the woman in the portrait. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. I learned that the house had once belonged to an artist, a recluse who vanished under mysterious circumstances. His works were renowned for their haunting beauty, much like our portrait. Yet, there was little about his personal life, nothing to explain the woman's presence in our home. One stormy night, as rain battered the windows and lightning illuminated the sky, I found myself standing before the portrait once more. The whispers were louder now, a cacophony that drowned out the storm. I closed my eyes, willing myself to understand, to bridge the gap between our worlds. Suddenly, a vivid image filled my mind. I saw the woman, her hands reaching out, her eyes wide with fear. She was trapped behind the canvas, a prisoner of the artist's creation. I understood then that the painting was a cage, a binding spell crafted by the artist to capture her essence. Her soul was trapped, crying out for liberation. The revelation shook me to my core. I knew I had to help her, to free her from her torment. But how? The answer came to me in a dream, a vision of fire consuming the canvas, reducing it to ash. It was a terrifying prospect, destroying something so beautiful, yet it felt right. It felt just. I shared my plan with Jonathan, who listened in silence, his face a mask of disbelief. He argued that I was being irrational, that we should seek professional help, but I was resolute. I could not ignore the woman's pleas any longer. On a calm night, when the moon hung low and full in the sky, I carried the painting into the garden, Jonathan watching from the doorway, a mix of fear and love in his eyes. I doused the canvas with lighter fluid, my hands trembling as I struck the match. The flame flickered, then caught, spreading quickly across the surface. For a moment, the woman's eyes seemed to meet mine, a silent gratitude shining within them. The fire roared, consuming the painting, the whispers rising to a fevered pitch before fading into silence. The painting crumbled to ash, the night air still and quiet. As the last embers died, a peace settled over me, a certainty that I had done the right thing. The disturbances ceased, the shadows receded, and the house felt warm and welcoming once more. Jonathan and I resumed our lives, the memory of the portrait fading like a dream upon waking. Yet, even now, as I sit in our living room, I sometimes catch a glimpse of blue in the corner of my eye, a fleeting impression of those piercing eyes. The fear lingers, whispering in the quiet moments, a reminder that some secrets are never truly laid to rest. The first time I saw the painting, it was hanging innocently in the corner of the little antique shop on the outskirts of town, a place where forgotten objects found new lives. The frame was ornate, golden leaves curling around the edges, a perfect harmony of age and beauty. The painting itself was a portrait of a woman, her expression serene yet somehow watchful. Her eyes seemed to follow me as I moved, ethereal blue against a backdrop of muted browns and greens. I was inexplicably drawn to it, and though my husband, David, was skeptical about buying such an oddity for our living room, I convinced him it would add character to our home. Our house was a modest, two-story building with creaky stairs and wooden floors that whispered underfoot. It was the kind of home that harbored echoes of laughter and comfort, where shadows played charmingly across the walls. We hung the painting in the dining room, where it could be admired during meals, a point of conversation for guests who might wander through. At first, it was just that, a quaint addition to our domestic life, a piece of art we would glance at with mild interest as we passed by. It wasn't long before I began to notice something peculiar. It started subtly, just a faint sensation that the room was not quite right whenever I was alone. The air around the painting felt charged, as if the atmosphere itself shifted imperceptibly when I entered. I brushed it off, attributing the feeling to my overactive imagination, a tendency to romanticize the mundane. Then, one sunny afternoon, as I returned home from the market, arms laden with groceries, the first real disturbance occurred. I stepped into the dining room and froze. The painting's glass cover was steaming, as if someone had breathed upon it with warm, moist breath. I placed the groceries on the table and wiped the glass with my sleeve. My hand came away damp, a chill racing down my spine. I convinced myself it had been a trick of the light, perhaps a result of the sun hitting the glass at just the right angle. But the painting had awakened something in our home. I began to hear noises in the night, soft whispers like the pages of a book being turned, or the rustle of fabric brushing against the floor. I would sit up in bed, heart pounding in the otherwise silent room. David, oblivious, would continue to snore, undisturbed by the subtle intrusions into our peace. One night, as I lay awake, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps tracing a path outside our bedroom door. A slow, deliberate pacing that sent shivers along my skin. I nudged David awake, my voice a harsh whisper. Do you hear that? He listened, frowning in the dark. It's probably just the house settling, he murmured before drifting back to sleep. His words were meant to be comforting, yet they did little to quell the unease that settled in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. The escalation was gradual but undeniable. The chill in the air became more pronounced, as if the painting had drawn the warmth from the room into itself. I found myself avoiding the dining room, opting to take meals in the kitchen instead. David noticed my reluctance and questioned me about it, but I could only shake my head, unable to articulate the growing dread that twisted in my stomach whenever I approached the painting. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, a language I could not understand, yet one that seemed to call to a part of me I didn't know existed. I began to have vivid dreams, all centered around the woman in the portrait. In one, she stood in a field of tall grass, beckoning me with a soft smile. In another, she was seated at our dining table, her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that left me breathless. I woke from these dreams with a mix of fear and an inexplicable yearning, as if the painting had planted a seed of something foreign within me. I became consumed by the need to uncover the painting's origin, to understand the connection I felt with the woman whose likeness it captured. I spent hours researching, sifting through old records at the local library, trying to match the painting to any known artist or period. But each attempt led to a dead end, the painting's history as elusive as the whispers that still echoed in our home. One particularly cold evening, as I sat alone in the living room, the whispers became voices, clear and crisp in the quiet of the house. They called my name, a beckoning tide that swept through my mind like a song. I felt compelled to rise, to follow the sound into the dining room where the painting hung in its familiar corner. The room was bathed in the silver light of the moon, casting long shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. I stood before the painting, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. The woman's eyes, normally calm and observant, now glimmered with an intensity that bordered on the feverish. Her lips, previously closed, seemed slightly parted, as if she were about to speak. I reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the glass. The moment my skin touched the surface, a shock ran through me, a current that rooted me to the spot. The whispers crescendoed into a symphony, a cacophony that drowned out my thoughts and filled the room with its terrible beauty. And then I saw it, a vision that unfolded like a story written in shadows and light. The woman in the painting, her life spilling out before me. She had been an artist, once vibrant and filled with ambition, but her life had taken a tragic turn, her dreams consumed by darkness, her spirit trapped within the confines of her own creation. Her portrait, a testament to her torment, had become her prison, and now she sought release. The vision passed, leaving me breathless and trembling, staring into the eyes of the woman who had shared with me her secret. I pulled my hand away, the connection severed, the room falling once more into silence. David found me there, hours later, my eyes still locked on the painting, my mind reeling from the revelation. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a jumble of emotion and fear. He listened, his skepticism melting into concern as he wrapped his arms around me. promising we would find a way to help her, to free her. The next day, we contacted an appraiser, hoping to understand more about the painting from a professional perspective. The appraiser arrived, a middle-aged man with a keen eye and a gentle manner. He studied the painting, his brow furrowed in concentration as he examined every detail. "It's a fascinating piece," he said finally, stepping back. "But I'm afraid it's not of any particular historical significance. It appears to be the work of an unknown artist, though the style suggests early 19th century." He paused, turning to face us. "There are stories, about paintings like this. Folklore, really. They say that sometimes the artist's spirit can become trapped in their own work, unable to move on." His words confirmed what I had seen, the vision playing over in my mind with renewed clarity. We thanked him for his time, and after he left, David and I sat in the dining room, the painting looming over us like a silent judge. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. David was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the woman's face. "I think," he said slowly, "we have to destroy it." The thought filled me with dread, a part of me revolting at the idea of destroying something so beautiful, yet another part understanding that it might be the only way to free her. We debated it for hours, weighing the morality of our decision against the fear that had taken root in our lives. In the end, we agreed. It was the only way to break the hold the painting had over us, to release the spirit of the woman trapped within. We waited until nightfall, the weight of our decision heavy in the air as we prepared to set the painting ablaze in the backyard. As the flames licked at the edges of the canvas, I felt a profound sense of loss mixed with relief. The whispers faded, the chill dissipating into the warmth of the fire. In that moment, I hoped that she had found peace, that her spirit was finally free to move beyond the confines of her painted prison. But even as the painting turned to ash, a lingering fear remained. It settled in the corners of our home, a quiet reminder of the darkness that once touched our lives. Though the whispers had ceased, the memory of them left a mark, a subtle shift in the air that would never quite leave us. In the months that followed, David and I fell back into the rhythms of normal life, the painting becoming a story we rarely spoke of. Yet, on quiet nights, when the house was still and shadows crept across the walls, I would find myself listening for the whispers, half expecting to hear them call my name once more. It was as if the painting had left an indelible impression on my soul, a haunting melody that played just beyond the edge of hearing. And in those moments, I couldn't help but wonder if some part of her lingered still, a ghost among the ashes, watching over us with eyes that had seen into the deepest corners of our fear. The house sat in a quiet neighborhood, unassuming and ordinary. Its white picket fence framed a small garden where roses bloomed with disciplined regularity. To the outside world, it was just another home, charming in a predictable sort of way. Inside, however, was an air of tranquility that offered a sanctuary to those who resided there. My wife, Anna, and I moved in shortly after our wedding, drawn to the promise of a fresh start. We delighted in the simple pleasures of setting up our new life, decorating each room with care, allowing our personalities to seep into the walls. The living room, with its soft hues of blue and cream, was our favorite spot. It was where we spent lazy Sunday afternoons, reading or listening to music, where we entertained friends over dinner, and where we dreamed up plans for the future. Above the fireplace, a portrait of a serene landscape hung, its muted colors offering a peacefulness that mirrored our lives. It depicted a forest shrouded in mist, with a lone figure standing by a narrow path, barely visible, almost blending into the shadows. For months, life continued in predictable harmony. We painted the kitchen a bright yellow, hoping it would infuse energy into our morning routines. We arranged the bookshelves with a mix of our favorite novels and travel guides. Everything was as it should be, or so we thought. It began with a sound, barely noticeable at first, a soft rustling like leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. I dismissed it as the old house settling, perhaps a draft sneaking through unseen cracks. But soon, the noise became more insistent, echoing in the silence of the night. On one such night, I woke up, heart pounding, and found Anna sitting upright in bed. Her eyes, wide and glassy, stared into the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tinged with unease. I listened closely, straining to catch the sound that had roused us from sleep. There it was again, a faint rustling, like whispers brushing against the edge of consciousness. "It's probably nothing," I said, trying to reassure both of us. But the words felt hollow, and I could tell Anna wasn't convinced. The days passed, each one layered with a veneer of normalcy that belied the growing tension at the edges of our lives. The sounds became more frequent, more persistent, always in the quiet hours after midnight. We began to feel as if the house itself were on edge, its atmosphere subtly shifting in ways we couldn't quite define. Then one evening, as we sat in the living room, the portrait above the fireplace caught my attention. The figure in the painting seemed more distinct, no longer a shadowy blur, but a person with discernible features. I squinted, leaning forward to get a better look. The figure's face held an expression of such sorrow, it was as if it were pleading for something. Anna noticed my distraction and followed my gaze. "Did it always look like that?" she asked, a puzzled frown creasing her forehead. "I don't think so," I replied, though doubt crept into my voice. Had we simply not noticed before, or was something more sinister at play? We decided to brush it off as a trick of the light, the dimness playing games with our perception. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, an omnipresent gaze that seemed to follow us from the portrait, never wavering. It was unnerving, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We began to avoid spending time in the living room, retreating instead to other parts of the house where we felt less exposed. One night, as the wind howled outside, I found myself alone in the living room. Anna had gone to bed early, exhausted by a restless week. I stared at the painting, compelled to confront whatever it was that lurked within its depths. As I approached, the rustling noise returned, clearer than ever, almost as if it were coming from the canvas itself. I reached out, hesitating only for a moment before my fingers brushed the surface. The paint felt smooth, cool to the touch, but beneath it, there was something else, a vibration, a pulse that thrummed with an energy I couldn't comprehend. I recoiled, heart racing, as if I had disturbed something that was better left untouched. The next morning, I told Anna about my experience, expecting skepticism or dismissal. To my surprise, she confessed that she, too, had felt a strange pull towards the portrait, an urge to uncover whatever lay beneath its layers. We decided to investigate further, driven by a mix of trepidation and curiosity. We scoured the internet for any information about the painting. It was an old piece, anonymous, with no signature or known origin. There were forums discussing haunted artifacts, but nothing that matched our experience. Every lead was a dead end, deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. As the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the portrait seemed to come alive with a quiet malevolence. Its presence loomed larger, infiltrating our minds even when we were not in the room. We argued more frequently, tension seeping into the fabric of our relationship like an unwelcome guest. One particularly stormy night, Anna and I sat at the kitchen table, our conversation stilted, punctuated by the occasional rumble of thunder. The power flickered, and the house was momentarily plunged into darkness. When the lights returned, Anna was gone. Panic surged through me as I called out her name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. I searched every corner of the house, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. It was only when I returned to the living room that I found her, standing transfixed before the portrait. "Anna?" I called softly, approaching her with caution. She didn't respond, her eyes locked onto the painting as if in a trance. I followed her gaze to the figure within the portrait. It had changed once more, its sorrowful expression replaced with one of recognition and longing. Suddenly, the rustling sound filled the room, louder and more insistent than ever. It seemed to swell, enveloping us in an invisible embrace. The room spun around me, the air growing thick and oppressive, pressing in on all sides. "Anna, snap out of it," I shouted, grabbing her shoulders and shaking her. The spell broke, and she blinked, confusion clouding her eyes. "What? What happened?" she asked, trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, pulling her into an embrace. But we need to figure this out. Together, we examined the painting, desperate to understand its secret. I ran my fingers along the edges, searching for anything unusual. It was Anna who noticed the small, almost imperceptible seam at the bottom of the frame. With careful precision, we pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a faded letter, its paper yellowed with age. The handwriting was delicate, almost elegant, but the words were filled with despair. To whoever finds this, I have been trapped within this painting, a prisoner of my own making. I sought to capture the beauty of the world, to immortalize it on canvas, but instead, I ensnared my own soul. The forest, once a haven, became my eternal cage, and I fear there is no escape. If you are reading this, know that the portrait will never release its hold willingly. It feeds on sorrow and fear, growing stronger with each passing day. I implore you, destroy it before it consumes you too, Anna. And I exchanged a look, understanding dawning between us. The painting, whatever power it possessed, had been leeching off our lives, sowing discord and fear. It had to be destroyed. We wasted no time in our resolve. Together, we carried the painting to the backyard, dousing it with lighter fluid. As the flames lit the edges of the canvas, the rustling sound rose to a crescendo, a final protest before it was consumed. When the fire burned out, only ashes remained, scattered by the wind. The weight that had pressed upon our home lifted, leaving behind a peacefulness that had been absent for too long. In the weeks that followed, Anna and I rebuilt what had been strained, drawing closer in the absence of the painting's influence. The house regained its warmth, its rooms once again filled with laughter and light. Yet, even now, a lingering fear remains, a memory of the darkness that had crept into our lives. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I catch myself listening for the whisper of leaves, the sound that heralded the portrait's insidious presence. But the house remains silent, the only rustle that of the trees outside, swaying gently in the wind. And though the painting is gone, its lesson endures, a reminder of the shadows that can dwell within the most ordinary places, waiting to be uncovered. Our home was a quaint, comfortable haven nestled within an idyllic neighborhood where the houses stood like old friends leaning into each other's stories. The air was always sweet with the fragrance of blooming roses from the garden that my wife, Clara, tended to with such care and dedication. Such was the life we led, a tapestry woven with the threads of routine and soft laughter. The kind of life that leaves you feeling content as you watch the world from your window. Our living room was a testament to our shared tastes, filled with eclectic pieces we had collected over the years. Among them was Clara's most cherished possession, a large, ornately framed painting that hung above the mantelpiece. It was a striking portrait, its subject a woman with eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stood in the room. Clara had discovered it during one of her antiquing adventures, and from the moment she laid eyes on it, she was entranced. This painting has a story to tell. I can feel it, Clara often said, her fingers tracing the frame's intricate carvings. I would nod, half amused at her fascination, yet unable to deny the painting's peculiar allure. There was something about the woman's eyes that stirred a whisper of unease in the back of my mind, but I dismissed it as a trick of the light, an artist's clever touch. It was on an evening like any other that the first disturbance occurred. We were settled on our plush sofa, the soft glow of the lamp our only illumination as we read our respective books. The house was quiet, the silence only broken by the occasional rustle of turning pages. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker, a subtle shift in the painting. I turned my head, expecting to find something amiss, but everything appeared unchanged. The woman's eyes were still fixated forward, her expression as inscrutable as ever. "Did you see that?" I asked Clara, half expecting her to laugh at my sudden question. She looked up, curious. "See what, dear?" "The painting. It flickered, I think." I knew how ridiculous it sounded as soon as the words left my mouth. Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You and your imagination. Maybe the light was playing tricks on you." I smiled back at her, willing myself to agree, but a small knot of anxiety had begun to form in my chest. Over the following days, the flickers continued, each one subtle yet undeniable. I began to feel a cold prickle at the base of my neck whenever I entered the room, as though the woman in the portrait was not just watching, but scrutinizing me. I confided in Clara, but she remained unconcerned, suggesting again that it was merely trickery of light and shadow. However, the disturbances escalated. I began to notice changes in the painting itself. The woman's expression, once serene, seemed to shift subtly each day. Her lips, which had been drawn in a slight smile, now appeared to twist into a faint smirk. Her eyes, always so compelling, seemed to burn with an intensity that had not been there before. One evening, as I walked into the living room, I stopped short. The room was bathed in an eerie luminescence emanating from the painting. I felt a chill seep into my bones, but my feet moved forward of their own accord, drawn to the strange glow. The woman's eyes were alight, not with color, but with an inexplicable life, as if she was aware of my presence in a way that transcended the boundaries of canvas and paint. Clara entered the room, her expression one of mild curiosity as she saw me standing frozen. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Look at the painting," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. She turned her gaze to the portrait, her brow furrowing slightly. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I blinked, the glow fading as quickly as it had appeared. Clara's eyes held no fear, no inkling of the terror that had gripped me. She saw only the painting she loved, unchanged and benign. My heart stuttered in my chest, and I wondered if perhaps I was losing my mind. Determined to uncover the truth, I began researching the painting's origins. Days blurred into nights as I pored over old records and art catalogs, seeking any clue about the artist or the subject. What I found was sparse, a few mentions of an obscure painter from the late 19th century, renowned for his portraits, but shrouded in mystery. There was no mention of the woman who had become the center of my obsession, as if she had been erased from history. Then, one particularly restless night, while Clara slept soundly beside me, I discovered something chilling. An old newspaper article, faded and torn, detailing a series of unexplained disappearances in the town where the artist had lived. Each victim had last been seen in the artist's company, their likenesses captured in portraits that had vanished alongside them. The realization clawed at me, an icy certainty that the painting in our living room harbored a sinister secret. I returned to the living room, unable to resist the pull of the portrait. The room was dark, the only light the pale moon filtering through the curtains. The painting seemed to pulse, its presence overwhelming. As I stared into the woman's eyes, I felt a strange sensation, as though I were being drawn into the depths of the canvas. Suddenly, the room was filled with a cacophony of whispers, the sound rising and falling like the tide. They seemed to speak in a language I could not comprehend, yet the intent was clear, a warning, a plea, an echo of the past. The woman's eyes bore into mine, and for a moment I understood her anguish, her desire to be free from the confines of her painted prison. Desperate to break the painting's hold over our lives, I resolved to destroy it. I retrieved a knife from the kitchen, my hands trembling as I approached the mantel. But as I raised the blade, Clara's voice broke the silence. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I have to end this," I replied, my voice shaking. "This painting, it's not what it seems. It's dangerous." Clara stepped between me and the portrait, her expression fierce. "You're scaring me. It's just a painting, nothing more." Frustration boiled within me, a tempest of fear and confusion. "You don't understand. It's haunted. I'm sure of it. We have to get rid of it." She shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "I won't let you destroy something so precious. We can't just destroy it because of your fears." Her words pierced through my resolve, and I lowered the knife, defeated. Clara returned to bed, her steps heavy with disappointment. I remained in the living room, my mind a whirlwind of doubt and dread. The next morning, Clara was gone. I found a note on the kitchen table, her handwriting neat and deliberate. She needed space, time to think about everything that had happened. I couldn't blame her. My obsession had driven a wedge between us, and I was left alone with my thoughts and the silent, watchful presence of the painting. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's absence weighed heavily on me. I avoided the living room, unable to face the painting that had brought so much turmoil into our lives. Yet, even as I tried to distance myself, I felt its presence, a constant pressure at the back of my mind. One evening, as I sat in the darkened kitchen, the whispers returned, louder now, more insistent. They filled the air, an oppressive chorus that drowned out all rational thought. I stumbled into the living room, drawn once more to the portrait's insidious allure. The woman's eyes blazed with a malevolent light, her smirk now a grotesque grin. The whispers reached a crescendo, and I felt myself being pulled into the painting, my consciousness slipping away. With a final, desperate effort, I tore my gaze from the portrait and ran from the room, the whispers echoing in my ears. I knew then that I had to get rid of the painting, regardless of Clara's attachment. It was the only way to free ourselves from its dark influence. I made arrangements to have it removed, but on the night before it was to be taken away, Clara returned. She found me in the living room, staring at the painting with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice raw with emotion. "I should have listened to you from the start." She approached slowly, her expression softening. I didn't want to believe it, but after being away, I realized that maybe there's more to this than we understand. Together, we faced the portrait one last time. As if sensing its impending demise, the woman's expression shifted, her eyes wide with something akin to desperation. The whispers rose again, but we stood firm, united in our resolve. The next morning, the painting was gone. The living room felt lighter without its oppressive presence, and the whispers were silenced at last. Clara and I embraced, the bond between us stronger for what we had endured. Yet, even as relief washed over me, a lingering fear remained, a fear that the painting's influence might not be so easily banished, that its dark secrets might yet find a way back into our lives. Some nights, when the house is quiet, I imagine I hear the whispers again, faint and distant, like the echoes of a forgotten nightmare. And in those moments, I wonder if we truly escaped, or if the painting's legacy lingers on, waiting for the next soul to fall under its spell. Our home was an old Victorian that sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by the whispers of ancient trees and the murmurs of a creek that ran behind it. My husband, Daniel, and I had moved in just a few months ago, charmed by its history and the stories etched into its very walls. The house had a certain elegance, a stately grace that was difficult to find these days. We spent our weekends restoring its faded glory, peeling back layers of wallpaper and uncovering hardwood floors hidden beneath worn carpets. It was a labor of love, a project that brought us closer together. The house came with its quirks, of course. Slight creaks in the night, the occasional draft that would send shivers down my spine, but nothing out of the ordinary for a house its age. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a refuge from the chaos of the outside world, our little haven, until the portrait arrived. We discovered it in the attic, tucked away beneath a pile of dusty old linens. It was an oil painting, meticulously detailed, depicting a scene that seemed both familiar and unsettling. A man and a woman stood in a lush landscape, their eyes fixed forward, as if eternally gazing past the boundary of the canvas into some unseen distance. The man wore a tailored suit, the kind that was fashionable in the late 19th century, and the woman was dressed in a long, flowing gown. There was something about their eyes that drew me in, something that felt strangely alive. Daniel was the first to suggest we hang it in the sitting room. "It's a piece of history," he said as he cleaned the frame, "and it belongs here." I reluctantly agreed, feeling an inexplicable unease whenever I looked at it. Once it was mounted on the wall, it seemed to become a part of the room, as if it had always been there. The first few days passed without incident. The painting became just another piece of decor, blending into the rhythm of our daily lives. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with the feeling that I was being watched. I would be sitting in the room, reading or knitting, and feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd glance at the painting, and the figures would seem to be looking directly at me, their expressions unreadable yet strangely knowing. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the mind. After all, I had always had an overactive imagination. But then came the dreams. They were vivid, more real than any dreams I had ever experienced. I would find myself in the world of the painting, walking through the same lush landscape, the figures always just out of reach. They would smile at me, but it was an unsettling smile, one that did not reach their eyes. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. When I finally mentioned it to Daniel, he laughed it off. "It's just a painting, Emily," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. "You're letting it get to you. Maybe you should take a break from the house for a while." He didn't understand. How could he? To him, it was simply an antique, nothing more. But the disturbances continued. I began to hear whispers at night, soft and indistinct, like secrets being told in the dark. Once, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker in the canvas that vanished when I turned to look. I tried to ignore it, writing it off as stress or fatigue, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a crash from the sitting room. Heart pounding, I rushed in to find the painting on the floor. The frame cracked, and the figures staring up at me with those inscrutable eyes. Daniel, who had been upstairs, came down at the sound. "What happened?" he asked, picking up the painting and examining it. "I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. "It just fell." He inspected the hook on the wall, finding nothing amiss. "It must have been loose," he concluded, though his tone was uncertain. Together, we rehung the painting, securing it more firmly this time. That night, the dreams were worse. I was in the painting again, but this time the figures spoke to me. Their voices were soft yet commanding, echoing in my mind even after I awoke. They wanted something from me, but I didn't know what. I began to avoid the sitting room, keeping the doors closed as if by doing so, I could shut out whatever malevolence the painting exuded. Daniel noticed my growing anxiety and suggested we take a short trip, get away for a while. I agreed, hoping distance would provide clarity. But even away from the house, the dreams persisted. They followed me, a constant reminder that whatever haunted the painting was not confined to its frame. I felt trapped, ensnared in a web of mystery and fear. When we returned home, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I began researching the house's history, trying to find any information about the previous owners or the origins of the painting. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The house had belonged to a wealthy couple in the late 1800s, a Mr. and Mrs. Crawford, who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Rumors abounded, tales of betrayal and tragic love that had ended in their unexplained disappearance. The painting, it seemed, was a portrait of them, painted shortly before they disappeared. As I dug deeper, I found references to a hidden room, a place that was said to hold the Crawford secrets. My heart raced as I realized that the landscape in the painting might be a clue to its location. The painting wasn't just a depiction. It was a map, a guide to something long hidden. Armed with this new knowledge, I began searching the house, tapping on walls, and examining every nook and cranny. It was during one such exploration that I found it, a small door hidden behind a bookcase in the study. My hands shook as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I descended slowly, each step echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder, and my breath formed small clouds in the dim light from my flashlight. At the bottom, I found a small chamber, its walls lined with shelves of dusty books and old artifacts. In the center of the room stood an easel and an unfinished canvas, the beginnings of a portrait identical to the one upstairs. As I examined the room, I felt a presence, a cold, calculating presence that seemed to watch my every move. The air felt thick, charged with an energy that coursed through me, filling me with dread. I knew then that the spirits of the Crawfords were here, bound to this place, trapped between worlds. A sudden sound, a soft sigh, broke the silence. I turned, my heart racing, but saw only shadows dancing on the walls. The whispers began again, more insistent this time. urging me to understand. I realized that they were not trying to harm me, but were reaching out, desperate for release. With trembling hands, I picked up the brush from the easel and began to paint, guided by a force beyond my understanding. The figures took shape beneath my strokes, their features emerging from the canvas with a life of their own. I painted until my hand cramped, until the room was filled with the scent of oil and turpentine. As I finished, the air grew still, the oppressive presence lifting as if a great weight had been removed. I felt a sense of peace, a gentle warmth spreading through me. The Crawfords, it seemed, had found their closure, their story finally complete. I ascended the stairs, leaving the hidden room behind. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the shadows had retreated. The painting in the sitting room no longer held its malevolent gaze. The figures looked serene, their eyes filled with gratitude. Daniel was waiting for me when I emerged, concern etched on his face. I told him everything, the mystery of the painting, the hidden room, and the spirits of the Crawfords. He listened, disbelief warring with awe in his eyes. Together, we decided to leave the painting where it was, a testament to the past, to the lives once lived within our walls. Though the disturbances ceased, a lingering fear remained with me, a reminder of how close we had come to something inexplicable. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, a chilling whisper in the stillness, but I no longer fear it. It is a part of this place, a part of us, woven into the fabric of our home like the whispers of history that echo through the halls. The portrait's secret was safe with us, a silent guardian of truths long buried, and a reminder that some stories never truly end. They simply become part of the tapestry of time, waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to look beyond the surface. The painting arrived at our home on a crisp autumn morning, wrapped carefully in layers of brown paper and twine. My husband, David, had purchased it from an obscure auction he frequented online, his latest fascination born of an innocent desire to decorate our walls with art that told stories. I remember the day vividly, the way the early sunlight filtered through the windows, casting elongated shadows on our wooden floors as we unwrapped the parcel together. It was a portrait, slightly larger than life, of a woman with strikingly pale skin and deep, quizzical eyes. Her hair, auburn and cascading, enveloped her shoulders like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze. She wore a dress of muted pastels, the fabric flowing as if caught in motion. What captivated me most was the expression on her face, a mixture of longing and melancholy, as if she were on the verge of telling a secret but stopped short. David proclaimed it perfect for the wall in our living room, above the fireplace. Its presence was commanding yet understated, a subtle intrigue that seemed to change with the light of the day. At first, the painting was simply another piece in our growing collection, a conversation starter for guests and a testament to David's eclectic taste. Life went on as it always did, filled with the mundane routines of work and home. David was an architect, often lost in his own world of blueprints and designs. While I taught art history at the local college, my days spent discussing the nuances of brushstrokes and the evolution of artistic movements. The painting was a curious addition, yet it never struck me as more than just that, a curiosity. It was a week later, on a particularly quiet evening, that I first noticed something unusual. I had settled into my usual spot on the couch, a book in hand, while David worked late in his study. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. My eyes wandered from the pages of my book to the portrait above the fireplace. Her eyes seemed to have shifted subtly, following my gaze with an intensity that was both unnerving and oddly comforting. Shaking off the sensation as a trick of light and tired eyes, I returned to my reading, but the feeling lingered, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. The next morning, as I brewed coffee in the kitchen, I caught sight of the painting from the corner of my eye. The woman's expression seemed different somehow, more animated, as though she were silently pleading for something just beyond my grasp. I dismissed it again, attributing it to my overactive imagination. Days passed, and the sense of unease grew. At night, I would lie awake, the image of the woman imprinted on the back of my eyelids, her eyes following me even in dreams. David noticed my restlessness, but I hesitated to tell him, fearing he would dismiss my concerns as fanciful notions. After all, it was just a painting, a mere assembly of canvas and paint. It wasn't until the following Saturday when the first real disturbance occurred. David had left early to visit a client, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to take advantage of the solitude to tackle some overdue cleaning. As I dusted the living room, my gaze inevitably drifted to the portrait. The air seemed to thicken, a palpable tension enveloping the room. The sensation was undeniable. I was not alone. The sound was faint at first, a soft shuffling, like feet moving cautiously across the floorboards. I paused, the feather duster suspended in midair, listening intently. The noise grew louder, accompanied by a gentle rustling, as though someone were shifting behind the walls. My heart began to race, every instinct urging me to leave the room, but a perverse curiosity anchored me in place. The noise ceased as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I exhaled shackily, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me. Yet, the feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible weight pressing down upon my shoulders. With trembling hands, I finished dusting and hurriedly left the room, seeking the comfort of daylight and noise. When David returned that evening, I recounted the experience to him, my voice laced with a nervous laugh as I attempted to make light of my fears. He listened patiently, nodding in all the right places, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He suggested that perhaps I was stressed, urging me to take a break from work. I agreed, though deep down, I knew that stress was not the root of this unease. As the days turned to weeks, the disturbances grew more frequent. Objects in the living room would shift inexplicably, small items disappearing only to reappear in odd places. The sensation of being watched intensified, the woman in the portrait seeming to observe my every move with a knowing gaze. I found myself drawn to her, as if she held the answers to questions I hadn't yet asked. One night, unable to sleep, I ventured into the living room, the darkness a comforting embrace. I stood before the fireplace, the painting looming above me, her eyes glinting in the dim light. It was then that I noticed something peculiar. Beneath the surface layer of paint, faint outlines shimmered, hidden images obscured by the artist's final strokes. Intrigued, I fetched a flashlight, angling the beam across the canvas. The outlines came into focus, tracing shapes that formed behind the woman's image, a shadowy figure, cloaked in ambiguity. The discovery was unsettling, yet it felt like a piece of a larger puzzle. The realization gnawed at me, an insistent whisper urging me to delve deeper. I became consumed by the portrait, examining it at every opportunity, searching for clues to the mystery it held. The escalation reached a crescendo on a stormy night, the wind howling outside as rain lashed against the windows. David was working late again, leaving me alone with the portrait and the secrets it harbored. As the storm raged, the electricity flickered, plunging the house into darkness. I sat in the living room, the faint glow of candles casting dancing shadows across the walls. It was then that I heard it, a soft, mournful whisper, barely audible above the din of the storm. I froze, straining to catch the words, but they eluded me, dissolving into the night. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged energy that set my nerves on edge. The whisper came again, clearer this time, a pleading, desperate voice calling out from the confines of the painting. Trembling, I approached the portrait, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman's eyes seemed to glow, alive with a sorrow that reached out to me. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to respond, to answer her silent call. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool canvas, and the room seemed to tilt, the boundaries between reality and illusion blurring. The sensation was dizzying, a vertiginous pull that left me reeling. The whisper intensified, wrapping around me like a shroud, and before I knew it, I was speaking, words tumbling from my lips in a language I did not recognize. The air crackled with energy, the room pulsating with an unseen force. As suddenly as it began, the sensation dissipated, leaving me breathless and disoriented. The storm outside had subsided, an eerie calm settling over the house. I stepped back, my mind racing with questions, the woman's eyes still locked onto mine. David found me there, standing in the semi-darkness, my face pale and drawn. He rushed to my side, concern etched across his features. I tried to explain what had happened, the words faltering in the face of his incredulity. He suggested we take down the painting, move it to the attic, and I agreed, though the thought filled me with an inexplicable sense of loss. We removed the portrait from the wall, the space above the fireplace now stark and empty. As we carried it up the stairs, I felt a strange reluctance, as if parting with an old friend. We placed it in a corner of the attic, covering it with a dusty sheet. I lingered for a moment, a silent farewell hovering in the air, before we descended back to the warmth of our home. In the days that followed, the house felt different, the atmosphere lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The disturbances ceased, and life began to fall back into its familiar rhythm. Yet, the memory of the portrait lingered, a haunting presence at the edges of my thoughts. I found myself returning to the attic, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see her again. But each time, I hesitated at the threshold, the fear of what I might find holding me back. The woman's eyes haunted my dreams, her voice a soft echo that faded with the morning light. The painting's secret remained just that, a mystery obscured by time and fading memories. Yet, the knowledge that it existed, hidden away in the shadows of our home, filled me with a lingering unease. I often wondered what had compelled the artist to capture such an enigmatic figure, what stories the canvas might reveal if only I dared to look closer. Despite the fear, a part of me longed for answers, the allure of the unknown, the tantalizing promise. The portrait was a testament to the mysteries that lie just beneath the surface of reality, a reminder of the secrets we choose to ignore. Though the disturbances had ceased, the house remained alive with possibility, the echoes of the past whispering through its halls. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, I could hear her, a soft voice calling out from beyond the veil, the portrait's secret a shadow that danced at the edge of my awareness. And though I may never fully unravel its mystery, the presence of that haunting gaze would forever remain imprinted on my soul, a silent witness to the depths of our hidden fears.